You're listening to Homely Planet, Northern Ireland.
Okay, everybody, we're going to kick off at that, so that's okay. Thanks a million for coming tonight to the Global Issues Seminar Series, which has been organised by the Centre for Global Education with the support of Trócaire, who's represented tonight by Mary, so thanks for coming, Mary. This document was published by the Centre for Global Education just a few months ago, and we received funding to publish this as part of a mini grant that we received from the Department for International Development. And we commissioned the research that's contained in this, and we awarded the tender to Ellie Odiambo, who's our speaker this evening, and his research partner Philip McDermott. And I think they both did a fantastic job. They published this just before Christmas, and we thought it would be a great way to kick off the seminar series if Ellie was to basically describe the research that's contained in this document, talk a wee bit about the methodology, and also the outcomes and the recommendations. The reason why the Centre for Global Education commissioned this research was because we wanted to get a better insight into the reasons why people leave their countries of origin in the Global South, and why specifically they came to the north of Ireland. And we discovered actually when we started the research there hadn't really been an awful lot of recent research on new communities, and particularly into migrants who have come to live here. So that's why the Centre wanted to commission the research to find out more about the experiences of migrants who have come to live here, and have their experiences been positive when they've come to live here, or have they been negative, or is it a bit of a mixed picture? So that's why we asked Ellie to carry out the research, and as I say, it was completed just before Christmas. Ellie is himself a community activist, originally from Kenya, who settled in the northwest of Ireland, and he has a particular interest in the fields of integration, migration, and conflict resolution. I also discovered recently that he's a one-time actor and more recently a playwright as well, because he's had a play, I think not on an unrelated issue, performed in Derry quite recently. So very interesting man in many ways. So I'm really, really delighted that he agreed to come down today. He rushed away from a lunchtime lecture up in Derry to be with us this evening, and I really appreciate it. So Ellie is going to take us through the research, describe, as I say, the methodology and the outcomes of the research, and then we haven't discussed how long exactly we're going to talk for, maybe 25 minutes, something like that. Okay, and then we'll have some discussion afterwards. Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
So Ellie, I'll hand over to you to get things started.
Right, thank you. Thanks for the long introduction.
Sorry.
No, not the content, but the content was good. But variously introducing me, thanks for inflating my ego and keeping everybody at ease. My interest in this work about migration is pretty obvious, because there is a current trend of serious issues of migration globally. Some are because of the relationships between the center and the periphery. And in the context of the migration debate or discourses, the center is usually perceived to be the global north. And then the periphery is always conventionally thought to be the global south. According to the United Nations, this definition, which is often disputed, the global north, global south, this definition, this terminology is something to do with industrial development of the global north. And I remember when we were doing the drafting, and Stephen's way of consultations during the drafting is pretty thorough. If you ever do any work with him. So I think one of the things that interested me when we were doing the research was the point about why is the global north and the global south, if you look at the south-north thing, why do you have the capital letter? Is it on the S or
Yes,
on the G? On the
Yeah.
S.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if it might sound, like that's a mistake there. I should be saying global south, but with a small g over there. Because we're trying to emphasize the reason why it's being put in that context. So it's the industrial north, except for the case of Australia and New Zealand in the south, apparently, until recently when they couldn't deal with the emergency that involved the flooding in Brisbane and what was the other place? In the outbacks there somewhere. But you could see that even the so-called industrialized world can have thorough situations that often are characterized by what happens in the global south. So after that wee rant of an introduction, I just wanted to say that when we chose to go into this research, we used a very common methodology of semi-structured interviews. So in terms of going to the field and speaking to people, we had easy accessibility to our participants because the interaction was both formal and informal. So whereas certain topics were sensitive, the individual interaction was easy. We didn't do the focus group thing that sometimes you have to use in interviews. We had a small number of participants, which is 12, and the reasons for that has been explained in the report, but also I think it confined us proper to focus on the main subject of the topic about why do people choose to come to Northern Ireland, why do people stay, why do they decide to go back, and so forth and so on and so forth. I am not going to do a lot of talking about authorities or big authors in the discourses of migration, because I know most of you already know them, or you read this in the texts. But what I'm going to say is try and elaborate a bit more about the findings of the report and give a comparative elaboration on what happens in other parts of the world. And also, one of the serious issues, I don't know if this is the right word to use, but the nature of the dynamic, always evolving Home Office, UK Border Agency laws, rules on immigration. These are very, very fluid thing. It's always changing. I don't know what to say. Maybe it's every fortnight or every month. Sometimes the speed at which the rules are changing, affecting refugees, asylum seekers, and most people who come from the global south. So we need to kind of understand the nature of the rules as to how it affects these people who come here, because part of the project was that there were certain partners that Center for Global Education works with, like the Refugee Action Group, who are doing a lot of advocacy work and lobbying around the politicians and people like that, so that they can find a better way for people who have come to this country but who may face certain challenges. So it's important that we do understand some of those, the aspects, the rules that affect these people. Okay, so never used one of these before because it looks like a TV remote. Okay, sorry, I'm not doing the right thing. It's actually a TV remote, I think. So I don't want to go through the whole text of the book, of the report, but I picked certain parts of the report which I would like to make an emphasis of or two. The number of people who come to Northern Ireland, the statistics keep changing. Most of the public institutions that have to deal with immigrants find that one of the main things they would like to know is how many immigrants are in Northern Ireland. I'm sure most of you who've worked in this field know this. The council, the local authorities, they always ask this question, but there is no definite number of how many people, either with papers or without papers, either undocumented, irregular. Sometimes people use the word illegal. I prefer to say regular because every circumstance is different. So one of the stories in this report is that there is no definite, definitive answer of the figures of immigrants. So when you see that we are talking about a certain number of refugees or asylum seekers every now and again, that number is fluid. There's no aggregate for it. You cannot say refugees from or asylum seekers from Middle East, Africa, Latin America, and then just compose an aggregate number. It's difficult, and that's one of the things that we faced in this report. But power of the story that was given by the immigrants, whether they were first generation, second generation, asylum seekers, all those communities, the stories, the narratives that they gave us, I think, was more important than trying to find the numbers of people here. Okay? It's an elusive subject because I remember when I participated in writing a report about Africans living in the west of the River Bann in Northern Ireland. It reached a stage where you had to think, right, okay, they were saying that there's about 1,700 black people in 2001 in Northern Ireland. But did that mean that these were all Africans? These were all, were they Afro-Caribbean? And what about the white people who come from Africa? You see, so if you looked at the definition of who was an African, you wouldn't have the correct number of people. So in this debate of migration in Northern Ireland, we must always be aware, I think, I cannot consider myself fully an expert in this, but I think we must always be aware that it's difficult, to make authoritative claims because things are ever changing. And for example, the issue of the census makes it even more difficult because the census is every 10 years. I think the next one will be in March this year. It's not been confirmed.